Hello, folks. Welcome to Between Awesome and Disaster. This is your host, Will Carey. I appreciate you guys listening and hope you're doing well wherever you are. I am run down, but I'm feeling good because my guest on today's episode of the show is a comedian that I know I met through mutual friends at the People's Improv Theater. Gabby Jordan Brown is my guest today. Gabby's younger than me. She's new to stand-up. But I enjoy being around her because I think she's very talented. She's showing a lot of promise. And I like being around people that are new to comedy, especially at the Pit, because I find it to be a very enthusiastic bunch of people. Because and I'm sure some of you might relate to this, I am prone to bouts of cynicism when it comes to show business and particularly stand-up, be it taking taking some like personal slights, career related slights. But ultimately, I have to remember that things are going pretty well, and I'm right where I want to be. Like, things are good, and being around people that are new to comedy kind of helps me remember why I started doing it in the first place and why I love being around funny people. And Gabby and taking shows that Gabby's on and hanging out with her and Nick Cohen and lots of other people in the general circle of the Pit brings me back to that place. So this is a fun chat that I had with Gabby that we'll get to shortly. I want to let you guys know my first professional voiceover acting job. You can listen to it now. I was part of a scripted podcast called Meet Cute, and if you've read the most recent article from Variety magazine, you'll learn more about them when it comes to the short form romantic comedy scripted podcast. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts. Again, it is called Meet Cute, and I will have some links in the description for that specific episode. I also want to let you guys know, if you want to help other people find Between Awesome and Disaster, we are available wherever you get your podcasts, and more people listening to the show helps more people find and listen to the show. So I appreciate you guys being my best advocate. I sometimes have a hard time doing it for myself, but I appreciate the folks that are here every week, and I do know a few of you out there who listen every week. So thank you guys very much for being here. I appreciate all of you, and let's go to my chat with comedian Gabby Jordan Brown.
Testing.
Yeah, absolutely. You're sounding good, Gabby.
Woo!
Now, and is it Gabby Jordan now, or is it?
God, I can't figure it out because like I started going by Gabby Jordan because I just feel like Gabby Brown is like my name in real life, you know. So when I started performing, I wanted to like make it a thing. I'm very obsessed with the idea of this is, I guess we're going in deep right away, but like I'm very obsessed with the idea of fresh starts. Like I will very often like, I don't know, dye my hair something new or like delete a social media profile or start another one and think like, all right, I'm cleansing the old thing. I probably need to work on that quality, but like when I started doing comedy, I was like, I'm Gabby Jordan now. And then I thought about it and I was like, that's not my name, you know, like that's my middle name, Jordan. It's not like my birth name. And then at one mic, someone just said Gabby Jordan Brown, and it kind of stuck. And it's the thing, it's like a mouthful of a stage name, but it's just when someone says it, it's like, oh yeah, that's me. And that's like my comedy. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does.
Yeah.
Because there's, you know, like who you are on stage is not exactly who you are in real life, but it's like, you know, you exaggerate certain parts for bits or what have you. So yeah, that kind of makes sense to me. This idea of the fresh start I find interesting. But the first place my mind went to is like the witness protection program. Like I just imagine you just testifying against mobsters.
Oh, fuck yeah. That's the dream.
Constantly. And then just have it, or like on Breaking Bad, everyone just like goes to Alaska. Like Alaska, it seems like the two places that people like when they're like burning it all down and they're like, oh, I got to get away from everything, man. It's either it's either Florida or Alaska.
Yeah, I made the mistake of watching the Breaking Bad movie without ever having seen the show. So I was like, why is Aaron Paul overacting so much? Like, it can't all be that bad. You know, like his character was just crying the whole time. I was like, what happened? But
a lot happened.
Yeah, my girlfriend was like, there were 6 seasons of what happened that you didn't watch. But at the end of the movie, no spoilers, but he does go to Alaska and he burns it all down. He gets a fake identity. And that actually got me thinking about the idea of fresh starts, because I was like, he in theory has a fresh start, but he doesn't psychologically have a fresh start. He's never going to cleanse himself of whatever horrible things happened to him. So I feel like you can't really ever have a fresh start. You can only have a clear mindset alongside the context that you already have for your own life. And then you just work with that and incorporate that into the next thing you do.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, because you can hit the 404 delete, but there's still a couple traces of whatever you're trying to run from.
For sure. And it comes up even deeper when you try and push it down, I think. Like,
right.
Yeah.
Because if you're kind of at a certain point, you kind of are who you are, and there's not a ton of growth or change or personal growth or change at a certain point, I think, for some people. So if you're trying to aggressively resist some characteristics or patterns, they sometimes come back in force, I've found.
For sure. It's like, 404 delete is a good word for it, because that's the idea of what you're trying to do. But I think as we get older and we accrue more trauma and we accrue more memories and experiences, there's just, you can run away, you can start in a new city, you can change your name, but you're so shaped by what you've gone through at a certain point. And I don't know, this is crazy, but once I went to a hypnotist, I found it on Groupon. And I just wanted to do it. It was cheap on Groupon. It's not cheap to go to if you don't do it on Groupon, so I never went again. But I went once, and the hypnotherapist was like, okay, imagine your younger self. And I was like, okay, the acting school over again. But I did it. I went and I imagined my younger self, and I remembered this unkempt, annoying, raw nerve ending of a child that I was, with these crazy bangs, always dirty, always running around everywhere. Because I grew up here, but I still wanted to run around. I just touched all of the dirty stuff in Manhattan all the time. I was just running around, falling on the sidewalk, getting up, just brushing off my hands and going back into it. And the hypnotist was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I want to forgive this child for being so annoying and brash and in everyone's face. And I think that every time I've been trying to get a fresh start, I've been trying to be less of this brash in your face person and trying to make people think less that I'm too much or that I'm too weird or too hard to understand. And I am trying to lean into that now, both in art and in my real life.
Fascinating. That is a lot of wisdom, because I don't know how old you are, but I feel like once I met Nick Cohen and started doing stuff with him at the Pit, and then I met you and a bunch of the other the stand-ups that are more in that scene, I started really feeling like the old man River of the group, because I've been in this city for it'll be 10 years, doing comedy for 12 and a half, because I was in Maryland before this. So the kind of the sort of aged wisdom that people that are lucky enough to grow up in this city have, I find very intriguing. So you're born and raised in New York.
Yeah, that's right.
Really?
Yeah.
That makes sense with the native New Yorker thing. All right, so I've got another for the show.
Yes. You're piling us up.
And what part of the city did you grow up in?
I grew up in the East Village.
East Village. So the cool part.
It was cool for sure. It kind of looked more like I don't know, it looks a little Starbucks and CVS now. Not that it was ever gentrified, because it was always kind of a bougie place, but it looked a little bit more like Williamsburg looks now, back then. Or at least, I mean, I don't know. I grew up, maybe East Village is a misnomer. I grew up a little bit closer to Union Square.
Okay.
So sort of straddling that border, but I don't know. Yeah, it was, I look at honestly, I watch old episodes of Sex in the City in 1990, like they're set in like 1998 or 1999.
Sure.
And I recognize things from when I was 5 or 6. I'm like, oh yeah, that flower shop used to be there. That like little bagel shop used to be there. So it definitely looks different. Still kind of the same energy, still the same neurotic place to grow up.
Yeah, it's still kind of I feel like they never quite kicked out that like that sort of like rebellious like punk rock kind of creativity that I think permeated like that in Soho and the whole lower east side. So this sounds like it might be towards like the slight beginnings, because I read this I read this thing about like New York. So like the center of like the folk scene was Greenwich Village in like the 60s, right? And then all of the artists got priced out of the Village, had to move to like the Lower East Side. Then they got priced out there, had to go to Williamsburg, and then they're just moving like further and further towards the ocean,
right?
Basically, because the one thing that I always rag on my fiance about is like the rest of the country where I grew up, we realized that waterfront property was valuable, whereas Giuliani just pushed.
Just pushed.
Like it was like, oh, get him close to the edges, get him close to the East River, get all the low income residents of this city away from me.
Giuliani started it. I mean, I feel like every native New York person has had a very complicated relationship to everybody who was the mayor at any given point. Like, we all, for example, had this, and this is like a smaller scale thing than gentrification, which is obviously like one of the most major problems the city is facing today. But for some reason, everyone in every New York school thought that the mayors were responsible for calling the snow days. It's actually a different department, I think, but Mayor Bloomberg's department would never call a snow day. Like, it could be a blizzard, the MTA could be nearly shut down, he'd be like, school's on, like, I don't care. And then when de Blasio took over, I think I was in college at the time, but my sister was still in high school, and de Blasio has a kid who I think is like her age, who was in public high school, and everyone would write on his Facebook wall all the time like, yo, fuck your dad, like, get him to cancel school for the snow day. And he'd be like, the mayor doesn't like do that. But it is interesting because Bloomberg would never do it, but for some reason under de Blasio's, I don't want to say regime, but under his administration, snow days, I guess, became more common.
Yeah, I think so. In Maryland, if there's even a chance it might snow, you'll at least get a 2-hour delay, because for some reason in Maryland, once it snows, everyone forgets how to drive. It's a real problem.
No, not Bloomberg's like, my driver can do it. Like, if my driver can do it, all of y'all can get in the subway and go to school.
That's the perspective. Like when I worked for I had a job with the Canadian government for a little while. It could snow. They didn't care because it's Canada.
Yeah, that's awesome though. That you worked for them.
Yeah, they live in the snow. They are one with the snow. Like the same way like Bane is one with the darkness, and the dark rises, that becomes him. So Lower Manhattan, hip part of Manhattan. You said, and what was home life like? What did your folks do?
My mom's a psychologist, and my dad did a couple of things. He mostly worked in technology, but he's also like an actor, director. So my dad was involved in the arts. My mom was always adjacently involved and supportive of the arts, but it was interesting. My dad was always very multifaceted. Like, I want to do a million things. And my mom was very like, I love doing the one thing that I do, which is having a private practice in New York as a therapist. And it was cool to see both sides of that as a model of how to live adult life, because you can find your calling and decide you just want to do that, or you can go try out a number of different things. And I think from my parents, I discovered that both of those things were valid and possible. But I think ultimately, they both saw that I had, some kind of a passion for the arts in addition to other things, and kind of was always an artsy household. Like, we always were watching movies and like analyzing them from an early age, and acting in plays, and just trying to do as much of that as possible, immerse ourselves into that.
Awesome. Mom was a psychiatrist. That's got to be interesting.
A therapist.
A therapist. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everyone says that. Everyone's like, oh, did she like prescribe you drugs and give you crazy advice? But like,
not that. I'm just curious if like if because I would imagine like if you like were like if you like acted up or something, they would just be like, this is why you're doing this, and then like just really deconstruct.
100%. Everything became
level.
kind of a not everything. I mean, I love my mother a lot, but I will say everything did become a little bit of like a teaching moment where it's like, why don't you find the deeper reason why you did this thing? And sometimes it's like, one thing I've learned in my adult life is sometimes you act up because you just want to. Like, there's no deeper reason. I've had to learn that. I think a lot of people do it the reverse way, where they grew up not in touch with their unconscious like reasoning for doing things, and then they get older and go to therapy, and it's like, okay, I did this because I have a deep longing for this. I did this because I have a difficult relationship with authority, this kind of thing. But for me, I grew up with an innate understanding of why I was doing everything, and like feeling like if I didn't understand a situation or was having a conflict with a friend, maybe I was missing some other reason why I was upset that was like lodged in my subconscious. And I had to grow up and grow out of that and be like, no, sometimes you're just hungry.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're just sad. That's been very healthy for me to try and knock off that part of myself that wants to analyze everything because it's what I grew up doing. It's also where I got kind of my mouth, you know, like I've kind of got a mouth on me. I tend to be a nice person, but I do have this ability where if someone pipes up, I can like be like, okay, this is this person's deepest insecurity, and I can flag it and I can hold it to chest unless I like really need to say it, and then I'll like eviscerate them. And that comes from my mother.
Yes.
And my mom can do that too because she's a psychologist, but she also kind of has a mouth on her, so she can like be like, okay, this is what this person wants, this is what this person's insecure about, and then she'll just hold it close and not say anything until you approach her about a situation. You're like, hey, I'm having this problem with a friend, and she's like, what can I say? Like, it's an Oedipal thing. She misses her father. It's like, what? Where did you get that? But it was honestly awesome. It's like kind of impressive, but I've had to learn to quiet my mouth a little bit as well. Just hold things close, you know.
Yeah. Imagine I wish I had more of that that wit, because I think I could have handled getting bullied in middle school a lot easier if I could just because you know, like when you're big and tall, you can't like yell and scream so much because you're always wrong even when you're right. And I would have liked to have been like, if someone's like pushing me, it was like to be able to pull out like, your dad's an alcoholic and you're going to be one too.
I will say I never had that wit in the moment. Like, I still have that thing where I come up with the comebacks, you know, 3 months later. I'm like sitting on the toilet and like, wait a second, like, she hates my friend because she's insecure the way my friend is insecure. And I'll be thinking about that as I'm like peeing or something, but I will never think of it in the moment. Absolutely never. I'm horrible with comebacks. I was in an elevator. I talked about this on stage. I was in an elevator once with these guys who I didn't know. And I was like looking at my phone because I'm on my phone pathologically all the time. And I missed my stop on the elevator, and I had my headphones in. I was like, did I miss my stop? Aloud. And one of the guys was like, yeah, it must have been a pretty good song you were listening to. And I was like, actually, it's a podcast, which is like not a good comeback. And they just laughed at me like the entire elevator ride. And then I went down. I was like, why did I say it's a podcast? What was I? Were they going to be like, oh, Malcolm Gladwell? Like, whew, never mind. Like, this girl knows what she's talking about.
Completely different thing. I have that all the time too. I always come up with the great Heckler comeback like the day after the show.
How often, if I can ask you, like, because I started doing stand-up kind of seriously, you know, 9 months ago. Like, I would do shows here and there for like years. I would do a show and then I'd stop every 6 months and then I'd do another show, but I never was like hitting the mics consistently until, you know, very recently. But how often would you say heckling actually comes up in stand-up?
In stand-up, honestly, in the circle, it depends on the venue. I would say, like, if you're in like the kind of like hip like Brooklyn alt back rooms of bars, very rarely. Or if it's heckling, it's usually someone just like trying to be cute.
Yeah.
very rarely have I been like maliciously heckled. I also don't put off that vibe a lot. Like you have
Right.
to be a real dick to want to like spar with me. Um, so honestly, it doesn't occur to me that much. I'm even hesitant to say it happens in clubs more often, but I think that might be more. It's more expected in clubs, especially like late second show Friday. It's late. People are probably a little had a few more drinks, but it's a good it is expected, but I do not feel that it is pervasive as the amount of like heckler videos on YouTube you would see.
Or just shows about stand-up. Like, I feel like every show about stand-up I watch is always like someone just tearing down a heckler. So when I first started it, I thought I would need to learn to come up with things to like tear down a heckler. But it's just one of those things where the improv brain has to come out, because it's like it just doesn't happen that often. It's not like crowd work. You can't plan it ahead.
Right. Yeah. It's a skill that you need to have, but I don't think it happens super often. Maybe more on the road, or if it's a certain kind of act, but I don't think it's nearly at least in my experience, it's not nearly as pervasive. The couple times it usually I've got two very funny heckler related stories, not related to me. Well, I'll say one. One time I got heckled. I was doing a joke about chopped cheese, and I mentioned aioli being pretentious mayonnaise, and someone shouted out like sun-dry, and I was like, I'm not like he was like trying to tag the joke. So that's not what I would consider heckle. But two times I went to two.
Sun-dried tomato. That's kind of funny. It's like, yeah, let me end that joke. Look, what?
Yeah, it's like not required. Input not required, not necessary to what I was doing. And then the other, I have two very memorable ones. One was when I was a door guy at the Laughing Devil. Rich Voss was headlining, and this guy and his wife he was just wasted, and he was like toxic. He was just ruined the whole show. Ended up having to kick him out. Tried to fight a couple of Jersey bros at the next table. I put my shoulders on him. He turned around, grabbed my shirt, and pushed me. And then the owner of the club, who's been on the show, thank you, Steve, got in between us because I can't hit him first. He's got to hit me.
Yeah.
If he's got to hit me first, and then so he gets in between, gets him out gets him out of the door. That was like the closest to violence I've ever gotten. Another really funny one was when I first moved here. I went to a show Eugene Mirman used to host at the Bell House. And for whatever reason, I don't know, but I believe it was the lead singer of the Butthole Surfers. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
I've absolutely heard of the Butthole Surfers. If you held a gun to my head and said, tell me what any of the Butthole Surfers looked like, I wouldn't be able to do it.
Their one big song was called Pepper. It was the one. It's the one that goes, I don't mind the sun sometimes. That.
Yes.
So he's not a comedian. So he gets on stage, and he's got like a bag of like props, and he has like a mannequin leg, and for some reason he keeps using the phrase Negro baby leg over and over again, which really upset this one woman in the crowd who got really hostile really quickly, and to the point where she runs up on stage and tries to grab the mic from him. And there's like a tug of war for the microphone. And then Eugene Mirman comes out, settles everybody, gets in between them, like calms it down. She goes, sits down, and then he sets off like a firecracker popper, like one of those like New Year's things with all the confetti.
I love that he just had it on his person.
He shoots off one of those and then walks off stage, and you just sitting there in this really uncomfortable, weird, quiet vibe in the room, and like there's like confetti falling down, and then he's just like looking at the ground like and then he just goes, so was at the mall yesterday.
Oh my god.
There are so many ATMs at the mall. And it whole crowd laughs because it got really weird. And then Todd Barry closed the show, and he was his tagline at the end of every he would tag every joke he say was like, thank you, please don't rush the stage. It was a really crazy, wild
The firecracker really kills me because now I'm like, okay, lesson learned. Like, always carry one. Like, no matter where you are, like, you could be at any open mic. Just always have.
It would be a pretty funny, pretty big way to end the show. Is like, especially like if you're super sedate. Is like, I don't like to be too flashy when I leave. So thank you guys very much. I'm Gabby Jordan.
What if the podcast just ended here? No, don't end it.
That would be amazing. That'd be like one of the best endings I think I could have never planned. Because again, the thing that I love about comedy is so much of it is just in the room.
Yeah.
Which makes it crazy, like trying to actually get gigs, because you just kind of have to tell people, hey, trust me, I'm great.
Yeah, even when you send a tape, it's like, all right, well, this was magic in the room, but you watch that tape back and you're like, oh, like, this doesn't look magic to someone just watching this tape who wasn't like there feeling the. Sometimes I feel like on stage, like, you either have them or you don't, and sometimes like you really have them, but like when you're watching someone's tape, you can't like tell necessarily. You're not in the room. You don't feel the energy of like, okay, this comedian has everyone right now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally. I've definitely had those shows when you're back and it's just like, oh, right, this is we're struggling. It's bit to bit, but it is so magical when like the crowds and then you just got them rolling. Like Sam Morril is a comic I really think is super funny. So I love what. I just watched his newest special and he's just like the whole crowd is just and it's just rolling, just the way the laughs are just like crashing each other on like waves, like a really serene day at the beach. Just great bit over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're growing up in an artsy household in an artsy part of the city. So it seems like there's a lot of creativity around you growing up. Are the arts on your radar at all at this age?
Like as a kid?
Yeah, like did you think early on I'm going to pursue a career in show business? Oh
my God, absolutely. I was so obnoxious. This is like what I said in the hypnotherapy thing. I was so obnoxious. I thought I was going to be like an Academy Award winning actress.
Uh-huh.
I got I should go back to this. So in 5th grade, there was a show that was put on in my elementary school called Annie, Get Your Gun.
Mm-hmm,
which you're familiar with for sure. It's problematic at best, but at the time I was like, you know what? I really want to play Annie because Annie kind of spoke to me. She was this like tomboyish, like didn't play by the rules girl, and I was like, that's me. But I couldn't sing, so I tried to sing in character. I prepared this whole thing with just this exaggerated Southern accent. I was like, I'm gonna act my way through her songs, which you can kind of do, but you can't really do it. But for some reason I was like, I'm such a good actress, like I'm definitely gonna get Annie. This was just what I thought. And then I was sitting in my 5th grade class and they did this weird thing where when they announced the parts, they like went in and just read everyone in the class who got it. They were like, there were 4 classrooms, I think, and so they went into each classroom and just picked everyone in the classroom who'd got a part and read off what that part was. So they read a bunch of bit parts, and I was so ready to get Annie. I was like, oh, I'm gonna pretend to faint. Like this is gonna be so. I was again the worst. I was like, this is gonna be so great. And then he said, and the role of Buffalo Bill goes to Gabriel. And I was like, who's Gabriel? And I realized he was just mispronouncing Gabrielle because shortly after he said that, he left the room. And I was like, okay, there's no one in the class named Gabriel. Like, there's only me, Gabrielle. By proxy, like, I got Buffalo Bill. And I, like, went in the stairwell and I cried and cried. I was like, I'm not Annie. Like, they think I'm some man. Like, I'm Buffalo Bill. And then the director had to talk to me and be like, it's okay. Like, some people didn't even get parts, which was very true. And then I talked to my mom and dad, and they were like, you know what? They probably needed, like, a really strong actor to play the role of Buffalo Bill because that's a real powerhouse role. Like, so just go and, like, you know, crush it. And I was like, yeah. So I spent, you know, whatever the process was of rehearsing for that play, like, not method acting, but maybe like the closest thing to it. Like I would try and like get into the physique of like an old man. I was like a 5th grader trying to feel like, oh, men sit like this and like Buffalo Bill's background is this. Like I made up a whole backstory for him. And then I
doing some real character work.
Yeah, I like deepened my voice, and I was like, this is when I decided. I was like, I'm a character actor. And then my mom said something really funny. She was like, character actors are often, they call them character actors because they're not very attractive. Like, so you're a lead, you're not a character actor, you're the lead role. And I was like, okay, but so then I dealt with that dichotomy for my whole childhood.
Sure.
Like, I always was drawn to playing. After Buffalo Bill, I wanted to be like characters. I wanted to try different weird shit with my acting. But I was like, I have to be this lead role person because I don't want to be unattractive like a character actor. And then that all went out the door because I was like, I don't know if acting's for me. Like,
right.
you know, years like, down the line.
Yeah, and then like as you get older, and then like you're like, oh, character actors work consistently.
Oh my God,
great.
all the time.
Then yes, I do want to do that.
I want to do it all the time.
That would be great.
Yeah, I feel like maybe I didn't even like let myself explore that part of myself when it actually mattered.
Mm-hmm.
When it came down to high school. I went to like an arts high school, and you had some level of creativity over choosing the kinds of stuff you wanted to pursue creatively, the kinds of scenes you wanted to read and work on. And
was this LaGuardia?
Yes.
My fiance went to LaGuardia also.
No shit.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I gotta talk to her about it.
Yeah, she's cool. She was on the technical theater side.
Oh yeah, okay. I was a drama major. The tech kids were always the coolest kids, honestly.
Oh yeah.
Like, they were the ones who you wanted to hang out with. They stayed till 8 p.m. They were like adults. They like just
they had
hung around
jobs
the building.
early.
They did. And they would have jobs for the rest of their lives going forward because everyone needs technicians. It's the coolest thing.
Yeah, 100%. And that's another thing I'm super jealous of is the specialized high schools. Like there's the aviation high school, or there's the performing arts high school. So was that like when you started doing plays where you're like, oh, I found my thing? Because I remember being really lost when from like middle school to like 10th grade in high school. I remember just being like, I got nothing I'm excited about.
You were trying to like find your thing.
Yeah, because like I didn't like sports. You know, I liked video games, but there wasn't much. There wasn't the path to being like in video games was not a thing at the when I was younger, and I went through a period of like, oh, maybe I'll be a pro wrestler, and then I didn't want to get hurt. And then,
fair enough.
And then eventually, I owe all credit to my best friend in the world who harangued me. I didn't freshman year, but I finally auditioned for the school play and got like a one scene role, and found the thing.
Yeah.
Because my drama teacher was really good about like letting us do everything. Like we built the sets, we did our own costumes. Like he was pretty much there to direct and then like make sure I guess nobody got pregnant. I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
So that was pretty exciting. So you go to LaGuardia for acting specifically?
Yeah, for acting specifically.
Okay. And so that's the dream at that time.
At that time, yes. But the thing about so here a little primer on how like high schools work in New York. So there's private schools, which is like this crazy Upper East, Upper West Side echelon of like wealth that like, you know, I grew up in a bougie area, but like that's the kind of like drive yourself in a limo to school like wealth. That's like
there's bougie and then there's like Upper West Side bougie. Yeah, it's
like not an area I ever touched. I like hung around with some of those kids sometimes because I went to summer camp and they were there, but like that's one area of New York. And then there's specialized high school, which is this strange other echelon of New York where, so in order to get into a specialized high school at the time that I was growing up, you had to either, in the case of LaGuardia, audition. And what LaGuardia used to make you do is they'd make you do 2 monologues, prepare 2 monologues, and then if they liked you, they would put you through to a callback round where you do like an improv scene or a cold read. But the thing with that, and I think LaGuardia has wisened up to this because they now only require 1 monologue, I believe, and the improv scene that used to just be like, if you're on the fence about someone, make them do an improv scene. The improv scene is now mandatory. The thing about preparing 2 monologues is that it creates an advantage for kids who are from an arts background.
Yeah.
Because nobody who just Googles monologue on the internet, those people are going to find the same monologues over and over again. And then the judges who are sitting on the other side of that table watching the auditions are going to be like, oh, this kid's doing this again. I've seen this monologue 20 times. And then they're just at a like easier risk of being counted out. Or like some kids don't have access to acting coaches. Yeah. Some kids don't have access to like
a monologue
improv
book.
Training, a monologue book. And it's the exact same thing with the other kind of specialized high school, which is academic. And that's, they used to have to take this test called the SHSAT, and which is basically just like the SAT Lite.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing you really got to be able to afford those books to prep for it. You got to be able to take classes. They have free classes, but it can be hard to like find the right ones. It can be hard to look around for things. You have to really kind of know the right people and understand the right resources. So in a way, at least for a while, and I think they're wisening up to this now, the specialized high schools were a little bit segregated, a little bit segregated by wealth, often segregated by race. In my year at LaGuardia, you know, there weren't that many African-American men in drama.
Yeah.
And since I think my sister's year, where there was only one or two, again, African-American men in drama, they've since like opened up they've changed their admissions process so that they're not just prioritizing whoever's at the top, because LaGuardia is a public school.
Yeah.
Stuyvesant's a public school. Bronx Science is a public school. Brooklyn Tech is a public school. So they're trying to make it more like a public school, not like a private school light.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
And then did you go to college for acting?
No, I didn't. After high school, I was like, whoa, that was so intense and so stressful. Like, my hobby just became the thing I had to do for school, and I don't want to do it again for a long time. So as my way of like taking a break from that, I studied like sociology instead. I was like, whatever, I want to fucking read some books. I want to do anything that isn't just like work on a scene until 7 p.m.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sociology. So and what is that exactly? Is that
the
like
study of society?
Well, we do live in a society.
I live in a society.
I learned this from the movies.
Me too. Many movies.
Yes. So is that like, were you thinking like, oh, maybe I'm gonna go into some kind of social work or nonprofit work? Like, I
had no idea. It was crazy. I later tacked on a creative writing major because I was like, maybe I want to keep doing something like this. But career wise, I had no idea what I wanted to do.
Now that's an interesting place to find yourself at, also to feel like it's this one thing for a long time, and then to suddenly not want to do it anymore, and then to be like have those questions like later on. I don't know what that's like, because once I discovered theater, I was like, okay, I've just found offshoots of each of that. It started at theater, and then it went to like, film, and then it went to comedy, and then it went to podcasting, and it just every check on the umbrella I'm going through basically.
Yeah.
So and where did you go to school?
I went to Hunter College.
So New York. So
still in New York.
Very New York.
Everything's through and through New York.
And have you ever thought of living anywhere else?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm like, 26 years in the same place. You're like, I gotta get out of here. I've thought about LA, and I know that everyone in New York is like, don't go to LA. But the truth is that I'm a neurotic hyperspeed person because I grew up in that world. And I think that a lot of people's complaints about LA is that it's too slow. Everyone gets too complacent. And I'm like, you know what? I need a little slow. I need a little complacent, because my instinct is always just to go and push a little harder and work a little more. And it's just like, that is exactly what causes burnout. Like, I noticed when I was hanging out in LA, like, when people meet up, like, they don't specify a time. They're not like, meet me here at 6:30. They're like, I'll drive by your house. Like, nobody the entire, like, 2 weeks I was hanging out in LA specified a time to hang out, like, the entire time.
Really?
It was nuts. Yeah, I couldn't believe it.
That's interesting. Because I'd always thought, like, the scariest thing you could text somebody who lives in Los Angeles is, like, what they say, oh, let's do lunch, and then you text back, so what time do you want to do lunch? Like, the actual follow-through is what's intimidating.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I kind of like that, because sometimes when people specify like a time to meet up for brunch, I'm like, damn, like, what if this person was just okay meeting 15 minutes later than we said, you know? And it stresses me out a little because it feels like regimenting your hobbies. Feels like but you have to in New York because
time is such a valuable commodity, I think, in New York, and especially I feel like New York like is the grind, like especially
Absolutely.
like especially when it comes to comedy, like the hustle of like going out and doing like four sets a night, or like I think Steve Byrne, I don't know if you know the comedian Steve Byrne. He's on Sullivan and Sons. He had this like free short film, I think it was on iTunes, where he did 13 sets in a night. I think someone has beaten that since. I think Aaron Berg did 23 or something crazy like that. But it's like kind of ingrained in the culture here because no one like comes to New York to retire because it's like a, you know, you got to go all the time, and that's why I think like you know, part of the reason I think pizza and bacon, egg, and cheese are such a thing is it's like food that you can like eat and walk at the same time. You like eat and continue to do a thing.
Yeah.
Like, whereas like even the food truck scene in Los Angeles, like they all collect around a certain place.
Right.
It's kind of it's kind of like, it's like everyone's very ambitious, but it's not. No one's killing themselves over it.
I don't know. I haven't figured out how I feel about the mentality here to do 4 or 5 sets in a night, because I have friends who do it and they're the hardest working people, like, you know, go out there crushing open mics every night. And then I have other friends who are like, I think it's more valuable for me to sit at home and write these jokes. So when I go to these mics, I don't feel naked. I don't feel like I just have to do my same 5 minutes again. I can try a new tag that I actually wrote on my own time. So like, on the one hand, when I have stretches where I go to a lot of mics in 1 week, I feel like, and maybe you relate to this, I feel like they're infectious. I feel like it's like, if you do 3 sets in a night, you want to do 4, you want to do 5. And it just like, sometimes I feel like the more mics I do, the more I'm stressed that I'm not going to enough mics.
Well, I definitely remember when I first moved here, like the thing was get on stage as much as possible. And this is the advice. I don't generally know if I have much good advice to give when it comes to comedy, but maybe this will be helpful to you. I
love that.
I think when you are new, it isn't, being on stage is important. There is a balance between, because you do have to put in like the work with writing. There eventually gets to a point where there's a point of diminishing
returns. Yes.
So, but I do think early on, it is important to get up as much as you can, and just because the act of being on stage, holding the microphone and talking, that's all got to start to feel natural.
And I agree with that. I feel like it's, whenever I go on stage like a lot in a week, I feel more productive. I feel better. I feel like I just, you know, it feels like going to the gym. You feel like so much stronger and more fit, and like you can take on, and in a way it's kind of like writing aloud, because sometimes if you do a rehearsed set enough, you're like more comfortable to add little tags, or like, I feel like sometimes the messing around at the mics is what leads to the most beautiful things, because there's some rooms where you cannot make a single person laugh, so you just have to pull something out of your ass, and you just have to respond to the energy of the room. And that's what creates, for me, like stage presence, I think. And trying to work on my stage presence is something I've been just trying to learn a little bit about as a new comedian.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That's and you get steeled through like those mics where no one's really paying attention. Make it a lot easier to deal with like the hostile crowd later on, because like, oh, this isn't too bad.
Yeah.
I've sometimes, I remember I've said on stage at open mics, I've if it's been really solid, I've been like, you can't hurt me. I've said that to rooms of comedians.
That's funny.
So you're relatively new to stand up, but did you like do improv as well? Like, how did you get it? How did you get in at the Pit? Like, I
started doing an improv class back when I was still in college. I got into improv because I went to the one summer camp that taught like long form improv to teenagers, and had a couple of really awesome counselors who ended up like later becoming like stand up and improv people in New York. Like,
oh, cool.
Like people who like teach at the Magnet now and like all these different places. But I always liked how communal improv felt, and I liked the idea of going out there and just hallucinating up, like making your brain blank, like just trusting whatever you say. That's the hardest thing. And I think eventually I realized that the pit was the kind of place where you could just put on any show.
Basically, yeah.
And I think they've realized it too, because I think that now you see so many like variety shows and stand-up shows there. And so I think the pivot from improv to stand-up kind of came from I was on an indie improv team with Nick. Nick Cohen, who's been on this pod before.
He is. I do lots of stuff with Nick. We have lots of good chats.
Lots of good times, good chats. He's the best. And he and I both were kind of thinking, like, we were getting really close on the improv team, and we were like, improv is often, for people who love it, it's all they want to do, but for other people it's just like a fun way to perform and get loose, but there's not really a future for people who aren't specifically passionate about only improv in improv. So we started wanting to do like weirder, like out of the box kind of all kinds of different like variety comedies. So we started doing our own 2-person improv shows called Unpaid Intern, and just like, 4 people would come, whatever, and we'd just do this like loose out of the box set for them, just do like literally whatever we wanted. So we got really close from doing that. And then one day he saw this mic listed on Free Mics at Eastville Comedy Club. And he was like, why don't you come with me to this open mic? And I hadn't done stand-up at that point, like 6 months. I was like, what if I'm terrible? And he was like, then we'll try again tomorrow. Like, we're here, we're friends. And I was like, okay. So we go to this mic. Both of us have great sets. And then it was weird because for the first maybe month of doing stand-up, I was basically only going to that one mic at Eastville. Every Monday at 8, I'd just go up and do a set. And then I started hitting the other mics, and I was like, wow, this is contagious. This is really infectious. And then in stand-up, as I'm sure you've noticed, like, people don't often pay attention to young comics, but back to the point about the pit and like being able to put on any show you want, Nick and I quickly realized that you can do that anywhere, most places. There's a lot of places in the city that just will let you put on any show you want. There's no stakes. None of us are famous. 20 people come to these shows and then they go away. They exist in a void. Maybe someone takes pictures, and it's like, that's so freeing and that's so nice because you can just do anything you want. And you find that like when you are willing to put on weird shows and just give your friends stage time or comedians, people in the community respond to it. So it's like I went from this new scared comic, like deer in the headlights, to like trying to produce my own shows and like reaching out to these comedians and be like, do you want to do 5 minutes? Thinking they would never say yes, and having them be like, yeah, absolutely, of course, because everyone's looking for stage time. So I found I love doing comedy, but I think my ultimate goal in stand-up and comedy and art is like producing more of my own stuff, because I think that that's where you create your work. That's where you curate what you want to hear from other people. That's where you literally, it's the smartest life hack, because you literally get yourself stage time. It's like, if no one will book me on your show, I'll book myself on my own fucking show. I don't care.
Yeah, that's basically how I operate. How I operated, because like it's like very punk rock to me. Like it's very like DIY. I have lots of parallels in the like in the punk and DIY music scene. Like hearing about like house shows, or like like all the weird places that I've done.
I want to do a Pollak show at some point. Shows. Just throw a Pollak at my house and have like 15 people come and just watch a couple of stand-ups do.
You could absolutely do that. There are lots of apartment shows in New York. There's shows
no rules
in LA. Yeah, because it's all, if something's cool enough, cool people are attracted to it. That's freeing, because like, and also because I don't have a lot of good producing skills. Like I know who I think is funny, but I sweat trying to get people in a room somewhere.
Right.
Is my kryptonite, is like that's the part of it that always stresses me out, is just is anyone going to show up here? Like my band, we got our first gig booked, and I'm like, is anyone going to come out to that? Thanks, Gabby. I appreciate that.
Of course.
And then when you decided you were going to get into stand-up, were you a fan of stand-up before that?
Oh yeah, I
Like,
watched
who-
it really infectious. I liked a lot of different people for a while. I was really into Doug Stanhope.
Doug Stanhope is great, and here's why that sounds odd to me, and I'm going to tell you why. And I mean this as a compliment, even though it might not come off as such. I know my circles that I came up with of comedians, and then the circle of folks that I've seen on Nick's shows, including yourself. There's a pureness to you, to all of you that I don't see in the circles that I started in.
Yeah.
Like when I started, I probably went to the Creek for 3 years and felt like I was at a party where I wasn't sure I was invited, and I would like stand next to people and no one would talk to me.
Right.
And it took a while to feel like I was a part of the club. But you guys feel like there's an excitement with the comedians that I see at Nick's shows that I like.
Oh yeah, and
it reminds me of why I started this in the first place.
How so? Like it reminds you of how like communal it kind of can be, or
well, just that it's fun to get on stage and tell jokes and get laughs without worrying about all of the other nonsense that people argue about constantly on Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of that comes from. So when I first did like my first stand-up I took like a class at Caroline's maybe like 3 years ago or something, and I was like still doing improv at the time, and I was like, this is great, but stand-up's a very solitary art, whereas improv is a very communal art, so I like improv. But then the first mic I started going to was like a women's and LGBT mic, and I think a lot of the friends I made in comedy have kind of bonded over this shared thing of like, sometimes, and I don't think this is true of every like mic you go to in the city, there are definitely, queer performers, and a lot of love to them, who believe that like because of the way they look or express their gender identity, like you cannot walk into a room full of like straight white dudes and feel safe. And that is true for a lot of people. Like there are like, people who do a certain kind of material where like that mic is just like not gonna get anything that they say. I like to do a mix of mics, but I will say there is sometimes I've been in a mic and been like, I am the only girl here, and it's weird. It's a weird feeling. It does feel like what you described at the Creek, like going to a party and being like, am I invited to this party? And
and that's a party that loves Doug Stanhope. I find interesting. I think he's one of my favorites. I think Beer Hall Putsch is one of the best comedy albums of all time. I love that album. So I found it interesting that he would be an influence of yours. I
don't think he's an influence. I like a lot of comedians and artists and musicians who I don't see as direct influences on any part of my life. I heard this thing once from this artist called Beach Fossils, who I really like, where I met him in person after a show, and my friend Leo is a musician, and he was like, do you have any advice for musicians? And the guy was like, take any art you like and any art you love and make the exact opposite of it. Which I found, at first I was like, what the fuck is he talking about? But then I thought about it, and I was like, if you are on stage doing inadvertent mimicry of your influences, you're gonna deviate from the actual day-to-day realities of your own life a lot of the time, unless your influences are directly attached to how you live your own life, which for me was never the case. I was always very influenced by comedians who I'd see them on stage and I'd be like, how the hell do they do that? Like Doug Stanhope with some of his wordplay, I'm like, how does he do that? That's unbelievable. And I don't know, that was what was inspiring to me. It was more the wordplay necessarily than any of the subject matter or talking points he has. And I don't know that if I met Doug Stanhope today, I would agree with all of his perspectives on certain things. I don't think I would agree with a lot of it.
I've actually heard he's very nice and interesting, and I've heard him in interviews, like what he does on stage is not necessarily his sense of humor off stage.
Right.
Like he likes really kind of like dumb, absurdist stuff, like Tim and Eric stuff. Like I've heard him mention that in interviews. That makes sense to me because most of my jokes are about like music and food and absurd situations I find myself in. But I really like Dave. I really love like Dave Attell or Lewis Black, and I am someone like every time I try to be political, either in music or comedy, it sucks. It's just not my wheelhouse. But I really like when people can do it well. And or Bill Burr, like I'm nothing like him, but he really makes me laugh.
Yeah.
So there is something I definitely see something to that. What are some hopes and aspirations? You say because here's I'm formulating your career path right now because
Please do, because I can't make sense of it myself.
Because I feel like the pit more so I feel like you see people now look at like UCB as like I'll take classes there and get a job on SNL. That's like there's a career path now there that I think people
delusional.
think about now.
Yeah.
But hearing you talk about being excited about producing, I feel like there's a future where you're a theater owner or a club owner.
I mean, I think about that all the time because those people, those are the people who I see them, and I don't know what it is, but there's just the sense of comfort to every like booker or club owner or theater producer where it's just like they might be doing a stressful thing, but they don't want to be famous. And I don't know if I'm the way I was as a little kid. I don't want to be famous. I want to do things that are meaningful. I want to be good to my friends. I want to be good to the earth. I want to get married and have kids. I want kind of a traditional life path. I don't know that the idea of being famous itself is striking to me the way it is to in high school I was around people who ended up later getting famous, and you really see it in them. No one gets famous by accident anymore. If someone wants to be famous, it
happens. Well, there's also like
it's more of like if somebody is famous, it's because they wanted to be. Nowadays, maybe not in the 1950s, maybe not even like in the 90s, when kids were kind of getting scooped up out of wherever and then like taken to the MGM lot and like locked away in a tower or whatever.
Sure.
But now you set out to do it in comedy and in acting, I think, and in music even.
Yeah, I don't think the only reason I had ever thought fame would be good is because maybe that would at a certain point I wouldn't have to worry about where's the next job coming from. All I ever want to do is work, because once I found the thing that I wanted to do more than lay around and play video games, I wanted more of that thing.
Right.
So because and I do think there is a certain thing to like if you really enjoy what your work, then it doesn't feel like work. I really feel like there's something to that. And then the other thing about like especially like if you have a place, because there's I feel like maybe in America especially there's a lot of like I feel like people have like personal crises of control, like they feel very out of control, and that's not a great feeling to be in, to feel like you don't have control over like your life or your circumstances or your situation, which is why I think Starbucks is so popular, because it's not the coffee, it's because they will literally make it however you want.
Yeah. And you always know what you're getting.
Yeah.
Starbucks is going to taste the same in the desert as it does in the middle of Times Square. It's going to be exactly the same product. No surprises.
And they make it and it'll be made specifically to your specifications. So you're running your life in that moment. So like if you have your own thing, then you're not dependent on gatekeepers or the industry or this magical word called industry.
Yeah. And I grew up hating Dogma, any kind of like, it's even why I believe that you should get on stage as much as possible, but whenever someone's like 14 mics a week or you're not really doing it, like my skin crawls. I'm like, what have you been fed that you want to like behold your life to this arbitrary number? Like, I don't know. There's something about any kind of dogma that drives me insane. And maybe that's why you were pointing out that like the friend group I've been running with in comedy is kind of like pure and sweet. I'm just like, I think that a lot of us, because there's this like, I mean, I'm probably the most, my comedy like is maybe, I don't know if you agree with this, like somewhat between alt and mainstream, but I could go up in a mainstream room and do okay. There's some people I know who are truly alt comedians, and when you're an adult comedian, you make your own rules. That's the truth. And Dogma goes out the fucking window, and all of that stuff just becomes noise in the background that sometimes noise in the background, you have to listen to it in order to serve your own career. And sometimes the noise is like, this noise is for someone else, and I have to go on this path in order to serve my own career. And I think that like the people I've been running with have been very open about like, just do whatever serves you, and helping each other serve each other in that way. And I don't know, it's kind of a cool thing. I hate any kind of just here's the rule, here's how you do it, because to me that's not what art is.
Well, the thing, every time someone has rules in comedy, there's very few hard and fast rules.
Yeah.
They're just telling you how to do comedy like them or what they like. I think there's a lot. I think there's something very specific to what you're testing, and that's why I like being around around you guys, is because it reminds me of when I first started going to open mics at a bar and grill in Baltimore, and I was just like, oh, my new joke works great. Oh, I must work on my next one. And then I was just sitting in I have this very vivid memory of sitting at a booth with a bunch of my comedy friends, and then and my ex-girlfriend being there with her new boyfriend who bombed, and then I went up on stage and killed.
Yes.
And then I was hanging out with my comedy buddies, and having my own thing, like the little tribe. I think there's something, community, I think is what they call that.
Yes, they do. And it's nice because like you talk about, it's like you don't even know each other really, but you know everything about each other because everything gets said and everybody's set. Everyone's most personal insecurity and often people's family situations get pulled into their sets, their relationships, their marital status, and it's like stuff that you wouldn't find out in about a friend that you just met until maybe like your 10th time meeting them. You just find out about a comic friend on day one, and I do think there's something beautiful about that. I also think there's something beautiful about having friends that you've known for 4 or 5 years who aren't comedians and like sticking to them as well. You have to have a balance, I find. Sometimes I will skip a mic to go to dinner with a college friend because I'm like, I kind of want to run, I want to talk to someone, I want to connect to someone on a human level, but sometimes I run premises by non-comedians to see what they think. Because I think some comedians are frustrated by the subjectivity of humor and being like, oh, you won't get it if you're a comic. I find it really invigorating because like ultimately who you're performing for is audience members. Like, so
I agree with that.
I'll like say it to a friend and they'll be like, oh, maybe the heart of what you're getting to is this thing, and I won't have even realized it until I spoke to them about it, So there's validity to that, but at the same time, comedy friends are just so treasured. There's like no one else who you form a closer bond with so fast in such a short period of time.
I think so. I think that's a really great note to end on. It's not quite
bang bang.
Not quite. But this has been great, Gabby. Thank you so much. Is there anything we can plug before we get out here?
Yeah, I host an open mic every Wednesday called Anne Hathaway Presents. So you can follow it at, I think it's Anne Hathaway Mic or it's Anne Hathaway Presents on Instagram. Follow the mic and see our happenings. I'm involved in an improvised podcast with Nick Cohen called Transmissions from Nowhere. So keep a lookout for that. I guess in general. Oh, and then we have a monthly show that we just started where the next one is March 5th at the Pit Underground, and it's called A Night of Funny Jokes. I mean, obviously you'll be there.
Yeah, I assume Nick will text me about that soon.
Yes. I mean, you will be, there watching the whole thing from the booth. But yeah, it's, we're trying to run it maybe like almost like a little parody of how like a classic comedy show would be. Like we don't introduce anyone with real credits. It's all like this comedian headlined Madison Square Garden, or like this comedian officiated my mother's wedding, like shit like that. So I don't know, it's a fun show. And then you can just follow me at Hip Soccer Mom.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you, Will.
Oh, no problem. Okay, folks, that's our show for this week. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this and think you know someone else who might enjoy the show as well, you can let them know. Between Awesome and Disaster is available wherever you get your podcasts. We are on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and you can leave a rating on Apple. That helps, or a review that helps other people find the show. And you can, of course, listen to the show on Stitcher and Spotify. That helps the show grow as well. I also want to give a shout out to my supporter on Patreon at the awesome producer level, Mary Beth Mooney. Thank you so much for your support. I really, really appreciate it. Also want to let you guys know, if you're interested in anything that I'm doing over on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/awesomedisaster. It's not required because I want to do this show for free. That is bonus stuff I do. If you feel like kicking me a little bread, I certainly appreciate it, but I also appreciate you listening as well. Thank you guys again so much for being here, and I will see you next week between Awesome and Disaster. Take care, everybody.